Welcome to the Gentleman Project Podcast. I'm Cory Moore.
And I'm Kirk Chugg. James Hadlock is joining us today in the studio. I don't know if any of you have met this guy, but he has an infectious energy. And he speaks from stage. He helps a lot of CEOs in their coaching. He's got a great background. We met down at Mac's place a couple of weeks ago, and I said, hey, what do you do? And he told me, and then he said, what do you do? And I told him that we do the Gentleman Project podcast, and he's like, oh, I totally know that podcast. I listen to that podcast. So through our conversation, I extended an invitation for him to come on the podcast, and I'm really excited for the authentic conversation that we're going to have today about values and teaching those things to our kids, and also becoming better versions of ourselves for our kids. So welcome to the studio this morning, and thanks for your time, James.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be here. I've been listening to the podcast. I've had many friends, people that I look up to have been a part of it, and just what a thrill to be here with both of you.
Yeah, we actually drew several parallels of people that we knew, and we'd never met each other before at all. And we all have these mutual friends, and everybody knows each other. So it's great. Tell us just a little bit about the background that you have in your family life, your professional life. Give some people some context here as they're listening.
Well, this is only an hour, 45 minutes? I don't know. Well, let me start with two of my most important roles, and that is of dad and father and husband. I am married to Alicia. We've been together for 14 years. We were both married before that, so we went through a lot of challenges, and wait for it, we have 9 children. So we have a blended family, and that looks like I had 2 daughters, she had 2 daughters and a son. And when we got together, we were both done, and until we weren't. We ended up having 4 kids together. So I have, our oldest is 29, and our youngest is turning 8 this week.
Wow, that's quite the spread.
That is cool. Wow. You're busy, man. You're
right. Well, and 4 grandkids.
Wow.
And so even though I'm still kind of in this young daddy phase.
Well, and you look 27.
Well, I appreciate that.
Okay, maybe 32.
Okay, yeah. But having this whole array of kids gives me such a different perspective on fatherhood.
Yeah.
You know, and this, my wife, oh my gosh, I am a ball of energy. I'm intense. And then I've got this quiet, soft, and I call her the tether to my balloon. She's the one that is always that great equalizer and just smooth all the time. And, here I am, just this ball of energy. And it is by far, we're a family's family. Like whenever we're thinking about what are we going to do, it's always, what are we going to do together? And it's not contrived. It's just, for whatever reason, everything revolves around our family. And I love it. I think about just this last November, we brought all the kids in from different parts of the country, and we had 20 of us, and I had this moment. We were at Little America, and we were doing their weekend brunch, and I just had this moment of holy smokes. Like here we all are, all of us, and we're happy to be together, and we're different parts of life, and everyone's experiencing something a little bit different because of the age difference. But it was family.
Yeah, that's cool.
So this focus on being together, this focus on, being happy together as a whole family, which is not a small family in your case, was that on purpose at some point, or is that like just the way it was? Like it just happened because a combined family, not everyone has that, but the people who do, sometimes it's easy and sometimes that's really hard. Tell us your experience of how that all came together.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I had some master plan, but I will tell you that the way that my wife and I show up with each other, I think is part of it. And I think, frankly, some of it was our kids were, we've done our best and we've fallen short a million times, but to just be available and because they are all just so full of life and they have a foundation, I think on some level of who they are, that they found on their own, they're able to just show up authentic and really just enjoy each other. And I mean, I'll give you one example of how that shows up. Our oldest son is 29. Our youngest 4 are getting into Pokemon right now. And on Thursday nights, there is a game haven where you can go do Pokemon trading night. And sometimes our 29-year-old will come down and pick up the other kids and take them down and just go hang out with them. Like, we didn't design that. So it's them. And so I'd love to take credit, but I can only take credit for a little part. And that is that I'm showing up authentic and making mistakes, but also just willing to connect and create that sense of belonging that I think is essential from a parent standpoint to really foster those relationships. But we didn't like intentionally say, okay, we're going to make sure that our family gets along, because I get that question a lot. I get a lot of other blended families saying, well, how do you guys make it happen? Well, that's like asking me, how does it feel like I'm still in honeymoon phase with my wife? And it's not tactical and it's not strategic. It's actually being available for the present moment and letting that, what I call that deeper wisdom, just kind of come through in a way where, I mean, we are so perfect for each other, and we've had a ton of fights and we've had a ton of struggles and we've had a lot of ups and downs, but we have just been so committed to just being ourselves together. And and there's just this deeper sense of connection. So
that's cool. So you talk a lot about being authentic and vulnerable, and a lot of people like that from you when they hear you speak on stage, or that's the reason why they have you come and speak. Talk to us about the importance of that vulnerability, and share with us some of the moments in your life that have made you who you are, even if those make you a little bit vulnerable.
So I was the oldest of 7, raised in Idaho and in a very religious family. And I lived a pretty average, normal, what you might expect in Southeast Idaho. Got decent grades in school, was athletic, played a lot of sports. But there was a part of me that felt like I would never measure up. And so I would show up and I would try to figure out in probably milliseconds, like, how did I need to show up in front of that person to get them to like me, accept me? And by the way, that served me well as a salesperson, because, that's kind of what they say is like, find common ground and kind of figure out what they like and then talk about that. But it was very contrived. And I called it my chameleon complex, where I'd be whatever you wanted me to be. And when I ended up serving an LDS mission, I ended up coming home, getting married, having a couple of kids, and just kind of going through what the game plan that, I thought I was supposed to live. And underneath it all, I felt like a fraud. I felt like I was falling short, that I would never measure up. And at the same time, I was having all this successful business. And when I was in my mid-20s, I ended up having some businesses that I ended up selling in Idaho and then moving to Utah. And long and short of it is I was feeling a lot of stress and overwhelm. And at the age of 31, I had the 26th fastest growing company here in Utah. So business-wise, I kind of thought I had it figured out. But underneath it all, insomnia, stomach issues, and I eventually found myself self-medicating and pushed my wife and 2 kids back to Idaho. So here I am in Utah, having all this financial success, but behind closed doors, I was a mess. And I was trying to hide it the whole time. And I now call it, I was suffering from I'm-fine-itis. Because if you met me, big smile on my face, everything's good, champ, and that's how I live my life. And it felt very contrived. And after having all these accolades and business successes, my self-medication turned into a full-blown addiction and mental health crisis. And for about 11 years, I ended up going through multiple rehab centers. I found myself in the psychiatric hospital a number of times, and eventually I was couch surfing. I was destitute. So at the age of 38, I'm suicidal. I am in a hotel in Midvale, Utah, one of those really seedy, where you can rent by the hour if you give them a couple bucks. And I've got a plan. I'm going to take my life. And over about a 2 or 3 day period, I'm reflecting on my 2 daughters. And one of the thoughts that came to mind was because I had heard of other, I had friends who had parents who had died by suicide. And I had a thought, and the thought was, a deadbeat dad is still better than a dead dad, which is, that's not shooting for the stars, is it? But that's where I was at. And it was enough. And with a couple of other experiences while I was in that hotel, something inside of me compelled me to call my mom. And so at 38 years old, my mom's driving down from Idaho to pick me up. And over a 2-week period, as I sat in this little farmhouse in Rexburg, Idaho, I got quiet. And I can't tell you that I was the one that intentionally thought about getting quiet or starting to reflect. I just did. And over that time, I started to explore, why was I this kind of a guy over here? And then all of a sudden I turn out where, if I was in your house, I was searching your medicine cabinet for pills. I just was. I had no value system to hang on to. All I could ever think about was, how do I fix my feelings right now? And over this 2-week period, as I just explored that and as I got quiet, I started to have these little insights and these just little hints about who I was. And what I came to realize is my entire life, I felt unlovable. Like I was never enough. And some of that stems from some sexual abuse that I had when I was younger. Some of it stems from the belief systems that I took and ran with in a certain way where I just never felt like I'd be good enough. And so coupling all of that feeling of being unlovable actually is what drove me to be a super overachiever, because if I could get you to accept me, if I could make a bunch of money, then maybe people would like me. But I always felt like a fraud. And then as I'm sitting there in this little farmhouse, I had a new thought that occurred. And the new thought was, here I am, 38 years old, nothing to my name, like I'm destitute in every single way you can imagine, spiritually, financially, physically, relationally. And the thought occurred to me, well, if that's all true, then who are my parents loving right now? And it was an insight. It wasn't intellectual whatsoever. It literally, and all of a sudden I saw, oh my gosh, they're loving me, like for me. It wasn't attached to anything else. And so in that moment, it was almost like somebody had turned a light switch on inside of me, and I knew that I was okay. And a couple of things occurred to me is I also knew that I would never struggle with an obsession with drugs or alcohol ever again, which was something you just don't hear, right? That's not the narrative that you usually hear. And the other thing that I just felt was I had a deeper purpose, something that I could be able to contribute to the world. So that was the start of it. And from there, when you know that you're lovable just at your core, how can you not but just show up as yourself? And so that's part of what I do today is, people tell me all the time my superpower is vulnerability, where I'm willing to just open up and they often say when you have as many experiences as I did that you carry a lot of baggage in those new relationships. My wife said, well, it's probably more like a storage unit. And that's okay. Like it makes me who I am today. Like, mm-hmm. And I'm so settled in that, like just being me. And let me tell you the freedom that comes with that, whether I'm on stage or on a podcast or even with one of my kids, and I can just be like, my kids will come in and they'll see me preparing for an event. And oftentimes I'll share one of my mug shots, because I can tell you all day long, but when you see a mug shot and you can't even tell that it's me, man, that opens people's eyes. And my kids, and I'll talk to them about it just as openly as I would if I was showing them, when I got the big award for being a top entrepreneur in the state. there is such a freedom to this. And again, it starts with being settled enough within yourself that you're okay. It's not, you hear some people are like, well, I don't care what anybody thinks. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being so comfortable in your own skin that it's okay to show all parts of you. But here's what I've noticed when it's been with an audience or just one-on-one with people that I work with. Everyone is starving to be themselves. And when you can show up that way, it literally it sends an invitation that it's okay. It's okay to not be okay.
You do a lot with mental health. For companies, you come in and talk to their employees about mental health, and you've been through your own challenges. What's your number one word of advice when you come into these companies? Maybe that's it, is be yourself. You have the license to be yourself, and it's okay not to be okay. But is there anything else that you would tell people who may be struggling through mental health that would help them?
Well, I think there's a couple of different conversations here because, and I'll give you some dismal numbers, and because we're sitting here in the state of Utah, so the Mental Health of America organization just posted and published their state of well-being for 2022. And in there, they compile a lot of data that's based on prescription use and insurance claims, and so hard data. And the state of Utah ranks 51 out of 51 in number of people, adults, that are living with mental illness. We are more sick with mental illness here in Utah than anywhere else in the country. We're last.
Didn't know that.
And when it comes to suicidal ideation, so thinking about taking your own life, we're also 51 out of 51. So the conversation is not an individual conversation by itself. It's a community conversation. So if I'm talking to the individual, then the conversation is more about it's okay to not be okay. And so it's more creating the kind of environment where it's okay for them to reach out and get the help that they need. I was just with the Attorney General's office recently, and we were just talking about the challenges with the Safe UT app, which was, funded by the state, and it just hasn't worked out. And the reason it hasn't is because this little thing called stigma. It's still not, we live in a society where it's still, it's nice in a controlled environment to, talk about these things, but could you imagine one of your employees coming to you and just and laying out what I just laid out in real time? I don't see very many employees that would feel comfortable doing that with their leaders. So the second conversation, and the one that I have the most and where I'm maybe the biggest advocate, is how do we help leaders understand the complexity of mental health in the workplace and the impact that it's having on the bottom line, on productivity, on absenteeism, on performance. I mean, I could go on and on and on, and it's compelling. The data is compelling, and yet it hasn't moved the needle. And so as I've sat back and I've thought about, well, how do we actually really get the attention of leaders and then get them bought into a different way of looking at these issues? Because it hasn't worked in the past. And then I have to look at my own experience and go, well, I knew the whole 11 years that I struggled with my own addictions, I knew they were bad. So what was the change? And it was insight. And where does insight come from? Well, it comes from getting more quiet and reflective. And so instead of me coming to a CEO and saying, hey, dude, you're screwing up, or hey, you've got to do this, I have found that it's more effective to just have gentle conversations around, well, what do you think about this? And then I make it more personal. Like, can you think of a time where you or your family's ever been impacted by mental health or addiction? So I don't know why I feel like I was chosen to be an advocate in this space. I never asked for it, at least not that I know of, at least not on an intellectual level, because it's a hard road, and it's a hard conversation to have when nobody sees it the way that you see it. And I just keep showing up, and I just keep being authentic, and I keep sharing, and I feel that people are starting to warm up to this. But, I've been on this path for more than a decade. And then I think, yesterday I was at this conference that I was speaking at, and one of the HR managers who's literally heard me speak for 3 years in a row, because I speak everywhere. If you're in HR in Utah, you've probably heard me speak 2 or 3 times. Sorry. But she comes up to me, and with big tears in her eyes, she goes, "I'm so excited to hear you speak, but I wish my leaders would listen. We have," and then she started to just give me numbers. I've got 4 people in a mental hospital right now. It's a big company. I've got a couple people who are in rehab right now, and my leaders will not listen to the conversation. And I have to wonder, what's going on in their lives where this is either too scary, or they're just overwhelmed, or maybe they just don't see it yet. But just pushing in information is not the answer. It's got to be a more inspiring type of dialogue, which is why I think I'm one of the advocates and one of the loudest voices when it comes to mental health in the workplace, is because that's where I live, as you can see.
So number one, thank you for being that advocate. Thank you for putting yourself out there, because I think all of us have people that we know and love that have had mental illness and or addictions. So thank you. Number one. Number two, would love for you to come talk to our HR group, who probably already knows you. We do. I
know Sean.
Okay. Yeah. Sean. And we just hired, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago now, we have a full-time person who is completely dedicated to mental health now in our company. So it'd be good for you to talk to them. Yeah. The next question I have is, and I talked to Kurt about this a week or 2 ago, but my little girl, 16, in high school, she's had 2 different friends who've reached out to her and said, "Hey, I'm at that place where I'm thinking about committing suicide." And so with your background, your personal experience, for us who have kids like I do, who are dealing with that kind of conversation at school, what do we do? What's the best way what do I say to my daughter? Like, how do I best support her and supporting her friends? And what do I do to help those friends, given that I don't know them very well? I've met them, and I don't know their parents at all. So just kind of walk us through, what would your advice be to parents who are dealing with that kind of a thing, either in their own family or via friends?
I think investing in the conversation before those calls start coming would be the best and ideal, right? Is can we start? I mean, it's no different than the conversations around drugs or sex or anything else. Like, preempting the situation is the most important. So if you haven't had these type of conversations that I'm about to share, start having those now, like the realness of that. And so that's number one. Number two, connection is key. Your daughter's friends reaching out to her tells me immediately that they trust her. And that starts with a connection. But what often happens as parents is we have a lot of yeah buts. I love you, but, or we put a lot of expectation around certain conversations or the way that it's supposed to look. And so we come in with a lot of agendas. We come in with expectation, which is what I felt innocently from my parents for years. And so uncovering that, number one is, you as a parent, if your daughter came to you, listen, just listen. Oftentimes, I don't even know if advice is the right approach. It's listen and gain a deeper understanding of what they are experiencing. So taking care of your daughter first, I think, is essential, to just make sure she knows she's loved, she's supported, and that you're there. The other thing is every situation is so different. A great answer is, I don't know, but let's go find it together. Because here's the thing, there are resources. I mean, there are resources galore here in Utah. The Safe UT app is one of those. You could call the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, and there are so many people willing to help. But I want to focus on that front end a little bit more. Connection through listening, and then making sure that you are sitting on the same side of the table as she is. So that's essential. It's starting the conversation. And then from there, like literally kind of walking down that path together. So you can access information online. You can access information from some of the resources I've already shared. I mean, you literally can call the suicide hotline if you'd like, and they would even walk you through on some things that you could do. So on your daughter's side, number one, without a doubt, is to make it essential that you connect with her and make sure that she knows that she is supported and she's not judged.
And I'm not sure I did that perfect, actually. Like looking at the situation backwards, right?
So why do you say that? Why do you say that?
Oh, because my reaction was, well, first, what I said was, and this could have been totally wrong, so I'm being vulnerable, but I said, babe, the first thing you need to do is you need to show her, this was the good part, show her some love. You need to reply to her. I'll help you with the text if you'd like. Like, why don't you say, hey, I love you. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. This is a bump in the road type of a message. What can I do for you? Can I come help you? Can I come see you? Whatever. Right. So that was the good part. And then I said, you need to be careful who your friends are, babe. Like, is this because this isn't the only, there's been some drugs related things with this same friend. So then I was kind of like, well, maybe you need to show her love, but you also need to ask yourself, is this the right friend? And start distancing yourself if it's not the right friend. Right. And so was that right or wrong? I don't know, but that's my gut reaction. Like as a parent, right? Like, so I was trying to say, hey, let's do the right thing. Let's show her love. Let's get her help. But at the same time, was it the right thing to say? And also you might want to think about distancing yourself from this friend. May or may not be the right thing to do. I don't know. That's how I reacted though. And then we got on the Safe UT app and I started helping my daughter with that. But
I think those are two separate conversations. I think as a father, as you're wanting to protect your kids. So the thing I would say, I don't know if that's right or wrong either, but I would say maybe
separate those
conversations into two. And the reason I say that is because there may be a feeling or a sense of judgment there because imagine the place she's in with this friend that's trusting her enough to reach out. Again, you did the best you could. And frankly, I think that's better than most. But just consider if you were to have those conversations. There's an awesome video. Thich Nhat Hanh, who is the second famous most Buddhist monk on the planet. He just passed away. But he did an interview with Oprah Winfrey that inspired me. This was several years ago on the impact of deep listening. No advice, no interrupting, no agenda. And the healing powers of just listening to somebody else until they feel completely heard, because immediately they feel supported and then they trust you. And then you know what happens? They share more and they share more. We have a 24/7 call center with the company we own. So this is what we do every single day. We do it from a preventative perspective all the way to crisis. So people who are just, wondering and having questions, all the way to a full coaching you in the moment on literally to keep you safe. And this is how we train them.
And what's your company, just so the listeners know?
Yeah, it's called Blue Novus. And we help companies proactively address mental health in the workplace on a cultural level. And we do that through, our care center, we call it, is the foundation of that. But we do a lot of training and support and working with managers and leaders on and parents, how to navigate exactly what you just talked about. But it starts with coming from that place of empathy and compassion and really trying to put yourself in their shoes first to just better understand. I wonder, if you were to ask the question, Cory, I wonder what it would be like to be my daughter in this moment faced with this kind of a thing. And I don't know that answer for you, but if you were to let your own wisdom asking that kind of a question, it'd be interesting to see what came up for you.
Yeah. And that's why I feel like I might've messed it up a little bit, because after that conversation, my daughter was pretty emotional about it, and I feel like the listening part was where I missed it. Like, well, tell me how you're feeling and tell me, where your head's at. And I'm proud of you for being that friend. That conversation didn't happen. You should show her love and let's work on it together happened. But the listening part and trying to see it from her point of view. No, my immediate reaction was, okay, how am I going to save my daughter? How is this going to affect her? So I think, there's some lessons learned for the listeners and myself for sure.
And you never know how your daughter's feeling either. If your daughter had ever had those types of feelings before, how does that make her feel when you're like, you don't want to be friends with those people?
Especially if you didn't ask.
What's wrong with me, right?
I didn't ask.
And here's the thing. So here is my premise with anyone that I work with or anyone I come across. Here's what I see. We're all doing the best we can given the kind of thinking that looks real to us in the moment. Now, what if you were to live your whole life that way? Like I can meet with somebody who has done horrific things. It doesn't mean that I am okay with that, but I get it. Because I'm going to tell you, I was the guy that would stop on the side of the road and help somebody fix a flat tire on the freeway when I'm driving from Idaho to Salt Lake in my early days. I mean, I was a good guy. And then I wasn't. And then I was making decisions, and there are things that you just wouldn't even want me to share with you on experiences and choices I made. And the whole time I'm going, I couldn't even believe what I was putting myself through and the choices I was making. But it was full survival mode for me. And because most of us judge other people for how they're showing up on the outside, but we see ourselves from how we feel on the inside, that's problematic. Because we really don't know, right? You have no idea until you start to connect and drop into a more relaxed state of conversation. And that's literally kind of the formula for what I do is I help people get quiet enough to let that deeper wisdom flow through more often.
So if someone has a family member who's going down, it feels like they're going down that path, right? This path of, I'm not sure who I am, and maybe they're trying new things, drugs, whatever, too much alcohol, because I think everyone's had that experience with someone. Yeah. And maybe you've already given us the advice that you would give here, but so what can we do proactively when we see that path, right? What could have someone said to you as you were starting down that path? Is there anything that would have made you be introspective? Is there anything that would have made you more quiet? What can we do to like help?
Invest in the relationship and build trust with them. Because if you do that, they're more apt to listen. I mean, I hear it all the time. I mean, a lot of parents will call me because I'm out there a lot. And they're like, my child, and they'll even sometimes use the word, they're a real problem. So how are they seeing their child?
As a problem.
As a problem, not as a human being. And then on the other side, if you talk to anyone who has navigated mental health and addiction, I'll tell you the common ground is they feel alone, they feel shame, they feel guilt. Now, they may not be showing you that type of behavior, but I'm telling you consistently, the thousands and thousands of people that I've worked with in the addiction recovery world, and just people I've talked to again and again and again, most people just feel just deeply alone. And so it does come back to, how can you invest in the relationship without getting caught up in the behavior, the outcomes, or whatever agendas you have? Because when I sit down with parents, and I have many a times, they start to see that they're making that problem more about them than they are their child. And it's just another version of, everybody is trying to navigate. And so we get caught up in our own identity and how we're experiencing life. And because we're so caught up in that, oftentimes we don't just take a moment to just relax and see it from a different perspective. One of the metaphors that I like is it's like if you're in a glass elevator and you were just looking out of a glass building, you see a certain perspective. But what if you hit, the 5th floor or the 10th floor? It's a whole different viewpoint. And the more that you can stay out of your own personal thinking and let some of that wisdom and that intuition arise, which we all have, and you've all played on that before. We've all had that moment, that gut feeling where you just knew what to do in the moment. You didn't even think about it. That's that wisdom in action that is operating for all of us. Just most of us don't really even, it doesn't occur to us that we can, tap into that more often. We have our blinders on, and it's just this one way. But we're innovative in work, and we think creative in all these other areas. But when it comes to our mental health, or the way the mind works, or our relationships, boy, we become so solid in our beliefs and how it's supposed to be. And I think that's why life looks the way it does right now. And it's, the numbers are really compelling, you guys. I mean, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people in the United States is currently living with mental illness. And I'm saying diagnosable. What about the people who feel burned out, who are on their edge? I mean, I will never forget my wife and I, when we first started our company, we were even working in the care center ourselves. Now, we have a whole staff that does that. And I remember taking a call in the morning from a school teacher from one of the school districts that we were supporting. And she was like, I'm starting class in 5 minutes and I can't even keep it together. And she was bawling, and my heart just went out to her, and this is someone who likely didn't have a mental illness in the terms that most people think. This was somebody who just, she was scared. She was completely incapable of getting it together. And literally I was coaching her in the moment to see if she could even show up to her 3rd grade class. So when I say 1 in 4 is living with mental illness, that's a diagnosable. And anytime I have an opportunity to speak in a public format, oftentimes I'll stop at some point where I'm inspired to, and I'll just invite, my entire audience. If you or a loved one's ever been impacted by mental health, I want you to stand up. And you want to talk about a change in the room when everybody stands up. And yet we continue to put these conversations to the side because of the stigma, right? Because of kind of what we think of mental health. I mean, if I walked in here and I had a broken wrist and I had my cast on, it's likely you would say something about it. And then I'd tell you the awesome story about when I was up in Midway and I was on the mountain and I tumbled and fell. And I mean, there'd almost be kind of like some bragging about it, right? But what if I just got released from the mental hospital yesterday? Is that something that I would talk in the same frame? And if I mentioned it to you out of context of of being me, of just another employee, you'd probably say, nope, stop. I don't, it would be an uncomfortable conversation. So let's get real. And I'm not wanting people to just show up like I am. I mean, I get a little bit of a free pass because of the work I do, right? So it's a little easier for me, but in the beginning it was not. So what can we do as leaders and fathers? And I'll tell you, the formula is really simple. Be real and be vulnerable with your employees and with your kids. I don't even have to go tell my kids or to instigate a conversation around drugs or alcohol or sex or same-sex attraction or anything. You know why? Because we're having those conversations all the time. And so they just come up when they have, and it's no big deal. Like there's no like this weird energy around it all. It's a conversation like talking about how awesome the Los Angeles Dodgers are, which, oh, by the way, is my team. If you,
you just made it weird. No, I'm kidding.
But do you know what I'm saying? These are conversations that the more we can normalize them, the more that our kids will come to us and just have a question that's just not, it won't have the same connotation to it. So that's where I help parents and leaders really understand is, are you willing to be vulnerable yourself? Are you willing to be authentic and just have these conversations? If you feel stressed at work, what if you were to talk about that with your employees and just say, you know what, last week I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed and maybe you saw it or you could feel it because I was a little bit more impatient with you. What do you think that's going to do for your employees?
Yeah, 100%. It'll give them the opportunity to admit that maybe they've got an issue as well that you could help them with.
And it creates trust.
And it's all about trust. Yeah. You think about whenever you have been struggling, who did you call? The person you trusted, the person you knew that wasn't going to go and post it on social media or get off and go, man, that guy, you always go to the person you trust. So invest in building that trust. And it starts at home. It starts at home.
I think that we should, I didn't even get into like anything else in your life, but this has been such an impactful and I think purposeful conversation around mental health that needs to be had. Like, I've had those experiences with my kids where their friends have texted them as well about ideation of suicide. And if Cory and I have both had that experience, I'm guessing that there's a lot of people out there whose kids have either had those ideas themselves or have had friends that have confided in them. So it's an important conversation to have, and I'm glad that we had it today. If you want to reach out to James, let them know, how would people get in touch with you and your company?
The easiest way to reach us is you can go on the internets, and you can just go to bluenovus.com, and that's spelled BLUNOVUS.com. And then I my email is posted everywhere, so I have no problem in sharing that. And that's just james@bluenovus.com.
Okay. I think we need to do like a part 2 with James too. And as these things change, to have a resident expert that is around this all the time, that knows the statistics, that knows the success stories of how we've saved people and helped people, to come back onto the podcast and give the listeners the newest information of what tools are available, I think is really important. If you've listened to the podcast today and felt that wisdom inside, that you know that there are people that love you, and to act on those promptings that come from inside of you, and to reach out to somebody for help.
You're not alone. You matter, and there's hope.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.
At the end of every podcast, we always ask people what they think it means to be a gentleman. Would you mind answering that question?
I think it's to be yourself. I think we greatly underestimate who we are. I think we don't actually know that inside of us is a wisdom that will guide us and direct us and help us in literally any situation that we're in. And we get so caught up in what we should be doing that we don't do what is necessary in the moment. And so to me, it comes back to that authenticity. Like, I find myself when I'm not preoccupied, a simple little example. When I'm not preoccupied or caught up in my head, I'm waiting for that person to come up to the door, and so I'm holding the door for them. But if I'm caught up in my own little world, I'm just passing through, and then of course I'm shrugging off, going, "That's no big deal, who holds doors open for people anyway?" But when I'm not caught up in my head and I'm just fully present, I'm a gentleman. At home, in the workplace, as a leader, as a father, in literally any situation. So to me, it's being fully present and authentic in the moment.
It's a good one. I like that answer. Thanks, James. Thanks for being with us. You're a stud.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. We invite you to like and subscribe to the podcast. We'll share these things on social media. And if you feel prompted to share this episode with someone else that may be dealing with a mental health challenge, we invite you to do that. Follow that prompting and make a difference in someone's life. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today. I'm Kirk Chugg.
I'm Cory Moore. Thanks, everyone.